I remember the moment like it was yesterday. I walked into the kitchen, still holding a cup of morning coffee, when I noticed a stack of papers resting on the table. The faint shimmer of the morning light revealed the bold letters at the top of the page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I froze. The sound of the clock felt louder than ever. My hand shook as I picked up the papers. The name on the line? Mine, Amanda Parker. The person initiating the divorce? Michael Parker, the man I thought was my forever. My voice refused to work. I sank into the chair, unable to comprehend how this could be happening. No warning, no fight, no conversation. Just cold, calculated betrayal. And then came the quiet sting. The realization that this was not a decision made in haste. It was a plot, one I was never meant to know about until it was too late. Until I remembered one thing, the prenup I had insisted upon. Suddenly, silence felt like strength. I met Michael 10 years ago. We weren't a fairy tale couple, but we came close. I was a quiet, hardworking woman trying to build a life in New York, and he was the charming guy with a smile that felt like home. When we married, I thought I had found my place. I gave everything I had to this relationship, every dollar, every moment, every piece of myself. In those 10 years, I became the fixer. The one who kept track of appointments, paid the overdue electric bill when he forgot, and worked late so he could pursue his passions. He called it teamwork. I called it love. Slowly, it felt like I was putting more and more into a well that refused to fill. Family gatherings were no different. At the Parker family dinner table, I was always an afterthought. Michael's sister, Sarah, was the golden child. The one who got the warm embraces, the knowing laughs. Meanwhile, I smiled quietly, refilling drinks and making sure the table felt festive. But deep down, I felt invisible, like a piece of their furniture. I remember Michael's mother brushing off my achievements with a shrug. The countless times she spoke over me. The subtle glances exchanged between him and Sarah when I spoke. The moments when he ignored my concerns and said, "That's just how my family is, Amanda. Don't make a big deal out of it." Through it all, I kept trying harder. If I just do more, if I just love harder, if I just work harder, maybe then I'll be enough. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. The roles were set. I was the quiet one, the supporter, the afterthought. And the rest of the family? They were too busy with themselves to notice. I gave everything, believing that loyalty would matter. Never realizing that sometimes silence is mistaken for weakness, and kindness can be used as a weapon. The sting came quickly. Just 2 days after I found those papers, the phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice dripping with practiced concern. "Hey, Amanda. I just wanted to call. We've been talking, and, well, it's for the best, you know?" I stood by the kitchen window, phone pressed to my ear, unable to form words. "For the best," I repeated, voice shaking. "Yeah," she sighed, as if she was the one burdened. "You've been great, but sometimes people just don't fit anymore. We thought it was better if you didn't come by tonight. Honestly, we might not answer the door if you show up. It's not personal." Not personal? The words sank like ice in my chest. Not personal that 10 years of my life were being erased by a quiet, calculated phone call. Not personal that I was being replaced in a family that I had poured myself into every single day. Not personal that every sacrifice I had made was being reduced to an awkward conversation about fitting in. I said nothing. Not because I was too hurt to speak, but because in that moment, something inside me shifted. The silence that came over me was different. It felt like steel. Whatever warmth had kept this flame burning was extinguished, and in its place came a quiet resolve. I pressed end call and set the phone down. No tears. No yelling. No begging. Just a quiet knowing that this chapter of my life was over and a new one was about to begin. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't try to fix the broken pieces. Instead, I acted. Quietly. Calmly. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank. The joint accounts? Closed. The recurring payments for Michael's golf club? Cancelled. The phone line he added to our family plan? Disconnected. The automatic gifts I used to send for every Parker family birthday? Deleted from my calendar. Then came the biggest reminder of all, the prenup. The agreement that Michael had waved off 10 years ago when I suggested it. Why bother, he'd said. We're forever. Yet I had insisted. Not out of doubt, but out of self-worth. I pulled the document from the safe and read it aloud to myself like a prayer. The words felt solid, almost holy. The agreement was clear. The house was mine, the savings I brought in were mine, and the investments we built together would be split fairly. Whatever game the Parker family was playing, the rules would now be defined by me. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because I wanted revenge, but because for once, I refused to disappear quietly. Not in their eyes, not in mine. Not anymore. My silence became a statement. My absence became a force. And in that quiet, I promised myself this. I would never beg for a seat at a table that refused to acknowledge my worth. Never again. A few days later, I received a call I didn't expect. It was David Carson, one of Michael's oldest friends. We hadn't spoken much over the years. He was always in the background at parties, a quiet witness. But this call felt different. Hey Amanda, he said gently. I'm sorry to bother you. I wanted to say I see it. All of it. I was silent for a moment. See what? Everything you've done for him. Everything you gave that no one noticed. Everything you sacrificed that was taken for granted. I watched for years. You weren't the problem, Amanda. You were the best thing about that family, and they treated you like you were disposable. My voice shook. Why are you telling me this now? He sighed deeply. Because you deserve to know. Because someone has to acknowledge it. And because when he came to us with this divorce plan, I read that prenup and I smiled. You thought 10 steps ahead. You protected yourself. Not because you wanted to win, Amanda, but because you refused to lose yourself. That takes strength. Not many people have it. For the first time in days, I felt seen. Truly seen. Not as Michael's wife, or Sarah's sister-in-law, or someone to tolerate. Just Amanda. Just a woman who gave until she had nothing left and refused to be broken when the people she trusted tried to walk away. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and watched the city lights shimmer in the distance. My phone buzzed with texts from Michael and his family, apologies wrapped in desperation, guilt disguised as concern. But I didn't reply. For the first time in 10 years, I felt at peace. Not because of their words, but because an unexpected voice reminded me of my worth. Not the worth the Parker family tried to define, but the worth I had always carried deep within. A week later, the texts started pouring in. Michael, Sarah, even their mother. Suddenly, the family that refused to acknowledge my worth was desperate to rewrite the story. Let's forget this happened, Michael said over the phone, voice tight with guilt. We acted too hastily. You're still part of this family. Sarah texted. We didn't mean to hurt you. We were scared, and it got out of hand. Their mother left a voicemail, voice wavering. Amanda, can we have lunch? Let's fix this for the sake of appearances. For the sake of appearances. Not for the sake of love, or respect, or accountability. Not because they valued me, or regretted the betrayal, but because the whispers had started. The friends and colleagues who knew the story weren't siding with the Parkers anymore. The questions were making them uncomfortable. The image of the happy family was cracking, and suddenly, I was worth reaching out to. But this was no longer about fixing appearances. This was about truth. And the truth was, none of this had ever been about me. Not when I gave, not when I sacrificed, and not when I was thrown out like an old belonging. I read the texts, listened to the voicemail, and felt nothing. Not anger, not hate, not desperation. Just a quiet clarity that came from knowing this chapter was over long ago. They weren't trying to make amends. They were trying to save themselves. And this time, I refused to be part of their story. A few nights later, a message arrived. Not from Michael. Not from the Parkers. It came from an unexpected place. Sarah Jennings, a former neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years. Hi Amanda, the message read. I'm sorry for reaching out like this, but I felt I had to. Do you remember when you came by with a casserole after my surgery? Or, when you watched my kids, so I could rest for an afternoon. You didn't have to, but you did. You weren't just Michael's wife. You were Amanda. You were kind. You were present. You made people feel seen, even when no one noticed how much you gave. My breath caught, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they represented. They weren't about appearances or obligation. They weren't about trying to save face. They were about truth. Then came another message, this time from David Carson. I thought you should know, when the news about the divorce started spreading, people weren't talking about how difficult you were. They were talking about how strong you must be, what you gave, what you sacrificed, what you refused to tolerate anymore. You didn't just save yourself, Amanda. You gave others permission to stand up too. I sank onto the edge of the bed, reading those words again and again. Not for their flattery, not for the ego boost, but for the quiet recognition that came with them. The recognition I hadn't been able to give myself for years. That night, I felt a warmth that went deeper than any apology the Parkers could muster. It was the warmth of knowing that kindness doesn't disappear when a chapter closes. It leaves a mark, in the quiet moments, in the hearts of those you've touched, and in the spaces where truth is cherished. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not as a wife. Not as an in-law. Not as an accessory to someone else's story. But as Amanda. Just Amanda. And for the first time in 10 years, that felt like enough. A few weeks later, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I was met by the trio I'd hoped never to see again. Michael, Sarah, and their mother. They stood awkwardly on my porch, rehearsed expressions plastered across their faces. Michael spoke first. Amanda, we're sorry. We came to ask if we can fix this. We miss you. We want to make things right. Sarah nodded quickly. We were wrong. We acted out of fear. Out of ego. Will you give us a chance to prove ourselves? Their mother chimed in, voice shaking. You were like a daughter to me. Let's put this behind us for the family. I stood there listening. Not flinching, not explaining, not reliving the moments that brought us here. Not this time. I smiled quietly, placed a hand on the door, and said 3 words that felt like the sum of 10 years' worth of heartbreak and belonging. Thank you, but no. Their faces fell, not in anger, but in a quiet, almost ashamed silence. And for the first time, it didn't matter. Not because I had stopped caring, but because I had stopped carrying their weight. I stepped back, closed the door slowly, and felt the warmth of the sun on the other side. Peace doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, in a moment when you realize the door you've just closed is also the door that leads to yourself. In the quiet that followed, I felt a warmth rising within me, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Not because the chapter had ended, but because I had finally claimed the pen to write the next one. To anyone listening to this, to anyone who has felt invisible, unwanted, or thrown aside by the very people who were supposed to cherish you, I want you to remember this. You are enough. Not because of the role you play, not because of the sacrifices you make, not because of how long you stay, but simply because you exist. Sometimes, saying no is the bravest thing you can do. Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer. Sometimes, walking away is how you walk toward yourself. The world may forget the moments you gave, but your worth doesn't hinge on their remembrance. It shines because it's rooted in truth. So, if you're standing at a door that no longer welcomes you, don't wait for an invitation. Turn the knob, step into the light, and walk away. Your next chapter is waiting, and this time, it's yours to write.